Welcome to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. I'm Allie Rose, certified clinical hypnotherapist and subconscious success coach. I help my clients stop self-sabotage and feel safe to create more wealth, worth, and wellness from within. If you find yourself stuck repeating the same unhelpful patterns in your life, health, business, or relationships, even after all the mindset work, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll hear deep dives into the hidden beliefs shaping your life and live hypno coaching sessions where someone shifts a block in real time. Because willpower isn't the problem, your subconscious story is. And when you shift it at the root, everything else begins to change. So let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. Today, we are kicking off a new type of episode for the podcast. I think if one thing has been apparent from every episode we've done is that we all carry stories from childhood. And I'm always so fascinated by how people overcome or work through those childhood stories to become the people that they are today. So I am going to be bringing on some of my favorite people and interviewing them about how the stories they grew up with and how they have or are in the process of shifting them. The coaching episodes and the episodes with Safiya and I will still remain. We're just adding these into the mix. And today, to kick things off, I thought that there's no better way to start than to turn the table and let you get to know my lovely co-host, Safiya Robinson, a bit more. So before we dive in and hear more from Safiya, let me more officially introduce her. Safiya Robinson is a story listener, writer, coach, and the creator of the Writing Black Joy project to center and celebrate the joyful stories of Black creators. Her books include Everything is a Thing, My Journey to Leading a Truly Authentic Life, and Lessons in Love. In addition, she's a keen world traveler who uses her writing to explore her experiences and philosophy on life, sprinkled with fun, humor, and big love from a small island or wherever she happens to be. She's also an aunt, sister, niece, and friend. In her spare time, you'll find her enjoying sunsets, baking or eating delicious treats, spending time with friends or family, and making corny jokes, often the same ones, repeatedly. Safiya, I'm number one, so excited to have you back after a brief hiatus from the podcast and
Good.
getting to meet you in person. And number two, to just have you as the first guest that I'm going to be interviewing. So welcome.
Thank you. I'd say thank you for having me, but I've missed being here. So I'd say thank you for having me back. It was great to meet in person, have that podcast meetup, and I'm excited about this episode. I've been excited about this since you told me the name of the podcast, and I was like, stories, yes, let's shift those stories. So I'm really excited, really
Yeah.
pleased to be here.
So I want to ask you, where do you want to dive in? I was going to ask you to share a little bit. We've talked about in previous episodes that you grew up in Barbados. So,
Hmm.
I didn't know if you wanted to paint a picture of what life was like there for you as a child, if that would be a good place to start.
Sure. One of the things I will say, and I may return or revisit it as a topic later, is that I feel like I had to get, I don't say really old because I'm not like super old, but I feel like I had to mature quite a lot to kind of be able to hold a lot of things at once. And so I will say that to say, like, I think I had a great childhood. I have two incredible sisters. Barbados is beautiful. Lots of memories of growing up on the beach and going to the beach with my dad and my cousins, and so lots of good, fun memories. As most of my very closest friends are friends from Barbados, friends I grew up with, still are to this day. So lots of good things, and also life things. Like my mom passed away when I was 9, and that fed into some of the stories that we'll be talking about later. So that was it was one of those things that I don't think I thought was really odd until I was older and felt like I had all these holes in what I felt like I knew or, feeling like I missed out on certain things. So it was a bit of both, right? Good memories, good people, good friends to this day, but also, yeah, hard things happened as well. So mixture, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that it wasn't until you got older that you saw maybe there were these holes. So when you look back, what were some of the unspoken rules or first beliefs that you remember having about yourself and what was possible for you?
Well, it, I think one of the things that happened probably when I was a teenager is I felt like there were things I didn't know that everybody else knew, right? So I felt like, people seem to know how to navigate relationships. Romantic relationships is probably a big one. People seem to know how to navigate them. I was still like, I don't know what's going on. Like, how can you tell if this thing is, I still feel that way sometimes, but it doesn't bother me so much as it did when I was a teenager. And just feeling like people knew things that I didn't know about life
Mm.
and that there was no way for me to catch up. And I would just be this weird outcast who didn't know things about life that other people knew. And I think that's like the earliest story I can think that I had for myself. And also that people didn't didn't like me, but I was never like I had close friends in different groups. Like I sang in a choir, I went to church, I grew up in church, I belonged to an orchestra. And so I had friends from different pockets, but there was always cliques at school, like groups of girls that would be together all the time. And I was like, I'll talk to anybody, I'll be friends with anybody. And I felt like I didn't have a place because there were things that I didn't understand. So I think that was probably the earliest one that I can think of, a story that I believed when I was younger. Yeah, definitely.
So I just want to clarify those beliefs, the ones that stood out to me were people knew things that I didn't know, I wouldn't be able to
Mm.
catch up. And then people didn't like me. Maybe I'm different, I don't fit, people don't like me, right?
Yeah.
How did those beliefs impact the choices that you either made back then or maybe some of the choices that you have made throughout your life?
I still feel there are things I don't know. But now I feel like I don't think any of us really know things. I think we're all just kind of figuring it out. And so if it's working for you, like keep it moving. So I think some of the stories I don't know that I necessarily let them go, but I feel like I've got a version of it now that I'm comfortable with. But in terms of the decisions that they sort of made me make in life, there were times that I put on a front so I could try to fit in with certain groups. Didn't work very well. I'm not I'm not the best at that. And so I think I think I just kind of accepted it like, yeah, I'm weird. People don't like me. That's cool. And I think it took me a long time sometimes to see the friendships that I had because I was so convinced that they couldn't be real. I think it took me a long time to be able to let in those friendships, let in the love and the care that people did have for me because I just didn't think it could happen.
Mhm. So you said, I still feel like there are things that I don't know, and I just feel more comfortable with that. It feels like there was a moment or a series of moments, or still probably unraveling now, whenever you realize, oh, there's another way to look at my life, where you became more comfortable with the not knowing, or you became more comfortable with seeing things in your life in a different way.
I think when I moved to the UK, and I will say that every time I've moved, I feel like I've discovered something that has changed how I look at things. Not in a bad way, but usually almost like feeling like, okay, I can actually see this whole picture now. Like before I was just seeing a small thing and that was the story I was telling myself. And now that small thing is still there, but there's like a bigger picture around it, context that I can see that makes it a lot clearer. And so when I first moved to the UK, I was 19, to university, and this was back in the 90s, so lots of letters and dropping coins in the phone box and that type of thing. And I felt like very immediately I could see that there were some relationships that were just not non-existent.
Mhm.
But I could also see that there were some that had legs, right? I still have letters from friends that wrote me back when I wrote them, and we stayed in touch, and we've stayed in touch to this day. And I think if you'd have asked me when I was leaving school, did I think I would still be in touch with those people? I probably would have said no. And I find moving has always been that clarifying factor for me. When in 2010, I left a city that I'd been working in for about 6 or 7 years. But even when I left university and came back to Barbados when my dad passed away, all those things, like I felt like I felt like I was sometimes surprised by the people who stayed in touch and who had fond memories of me and who, you know, who kind of maintained those friendships over the years. And sometimes it wasn't the people I thought it was going to be. But I think all that taught me was that there are people out there who care about me, who want to stay in touch with me, who want to, maintain those friendships. And also that some friendships aren't forever, right? Some relationships aren't forever. Some relationships are deeper than others. So I think it started making me realize that when I was a teenager, all these ideas I had about friendship, I guess, are based on like TV or books, and it's like everybody's going to be your best friend forever and all of that. And now it's like that's not happening. And some friendships will ebb and flow as time and circumstances and everything change. And there's some, that's actually quite normal and it's quite okay. And they are still people who will care about you even through all of those things.
Right, right. So it sounds like some of the key moments that have shifted you have been moving and travel and that meeting different people and then learning who was going to maintain certain relationship with you or who was going to drop away. Would you say that there are any other key moments or big shifts that helped you shift some stories about yourself?
Something happened really recently, actually. I met up with somebody that I had not seen for years. We went to school together, but I had not seen in person for decades, I would say. And I was just having a chat with this person, and we were just talking about, school days and different things. One thing I should say, you asked about growing up in Barbados, and I think growing up on a small island, people, especially if you live there, people stay in touch in different ways. I have friends that I have now that I met at university in the UK who were like, they've never they've never spoken to anyone they went to school with ever again. And it's weird to them that my closest friends are still the people I went to primary and secondary school with. But a small island will do that to you, right? So I should start by saying that. But so I met up with this guy. We were just talking about school days and whatever. And he mentioned something. Now, I remember having a big crush on this guy when we were at school, and I don't think he's ever gonna listen to this podcast or even know that I'm talking about him, so I'm cool with saying that. So, I had this big crush on him when we were at school, and I was totally convinced that he did not know I existed, right? And that shaped ideas I had about myself in terms of like I even up to a few years ago, I remember telling people like, I used to be really ugly when I was younger, and I've definitely gotten better looking now. And my friends are always like, you look exactly the same as you did then. What are you talking about? But I was just convinced. So he and I were chatting a little bit, and he was telling me a little bit about what was going on for him when we were at school, and he told me this story, and it just got me thinking, like, I suddenly thought, it had nothing to do with me. Like, here I was thinking, "Okay, this guy isn't interested in me," and, like, as a teenager, you kind of have this thing the whole world revolves around you, right? So, like, this guy isn't talking to me, and therefore, it says all these things about me, and he had his own stuff going on, right? It had nothing to do with me at all. The fact that we met up a couple of years ago, all these years on, he obviously did know who I was, or we wouldn't have been meeting up, right? But it just made me think to myself, like, oh my goodness, I was so convinced there was something about me that was hideous and horrible that meant that that was why he wasn't interested, when actually he had his own stuff going on in life. And it just made me think, if you were wrong about that, what else were you wrong about? And I feel like that has been one of the things that has had the biggest impact on my life is when I started asking myself different questions, right? For me, when he said that, I was like, oh my God, you were so wrong. I'm like, if you were so wrong about something you were so convinced about, there gotta be other stuff you're wrong about. What other stuff are you wrong about? And it kind of then made me open to investigating some of the things that I believed then, but also questioning other things that, when I come to be doing something and I think to myself, I'm getting fixated on this being the way to do it. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? There has to be some other ways to do this. Like, starting to question myself more and not just accept the things that I believe or the things that are driving me.
Right. I love that because we often, in our other episodes, we talk a lot about having curiosity for yourself and compassion for yourself when you start to recognize a certain pattern
Mm.
or certain thing in your life. So, this idea of if I was wrong about that, what else could I be wrong about? What do you feel like that has opened up for you? Because to me, that feels like one of those really eye opening questions that you can ask yourself. So, what has that
Yeah.
opened up for you?
So I think it was the first time I asked myself the question phrased in that way,
Hmm.
but it it also created a bit of space for me in other questions that I was answering. So I actually I still blog occasionally, not as much as I used to. And I started writing these blog posts about these questions that I've been asking. And I don't ask them for the answers. That's been a big change in my life. Like I used to be very fixated on answers. And now I just like questions and the space that they create. And one of the one of the impacts that that has had, if I start to question myself and the things that I believe, then, you know, I kind of question everything now. So like one of the questions I asked myself, which had a huge impact, was like, is it too late to retire early? I haven't actually found the answer to that question, but just being able to question my belief that like it's too late and like is it really too late? Kind of, because then if it isn't too late, what else could you do? It kind of created a lot of space for me. So I think that one question about like, what else were you wrong about? I couldn't answer it at the time and I still can't answer it, but I'm constantly now able to question things that I think in the past I wouldn't have been able to question.
Right. And so you mentioned asking yourself this question, is it too late to retire early? I love that and I'm probably going to like it feels like a quotable moment of like I used to be very fixated on answers, but now I love questions and the space that they create. It just feels so expansive for me, right? So I wonder what else and what other areas of your life you've been asking yourself questions that have expanded your view of yourself, the world, or other people.
Yeah. So I think this started for me when I started traveling and meeting other people. I will mention that because I feel like that's probably the thing that's had the biggest impact on me. And seeing people live different lives. You come from a small island, you think this is life, this is the way the world is. Or you imagine, I watch TV and I see people in America or the UK, and I think that must be what it's like over there. And then I actually go to these places and it's like, okay, first of all, it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be. And second of all, people are living completely different lives. So it allowed me to then sort of think about different ways to live in terms of, you know, I won't give away my age, but I'm, not the youngest person in the world. I'm still single. I'm happy about that. Things like things about how, when I was growing up, I just assumed that you had to get married and you had to have kids because you're a woman and that's what you do. And then I was like, oh, I don't have to do that. That's great. So I feel like I've asked myself that question a lot, but never in the way that I asked it on that day.
Mhm.
Right? And then other question that I've now been able to ask myself, one that I wrote about recently, but I'm still thinking about it, is this idea of acceptance, right? And there are a lot of things about the world that make me very angry.
Mm.
And there are a lot of people who are like, you gotta accept it and move on. And I'm like, no, don't want to accept it. Are you mad? What? But there's some things you can't change, right? And so one of the questions I've been asking myself recently is, and in fact, that was another question that started it, like, what if acceptance means asking different questions? What
Mm.
if it doesn't mean just being like, okay, I'm all right with this crazy stuff happening in the world and I'm going to just calm down about it because that's happening. But what if it just means asking different types of questions? Like, if I can't control something, what can I control? Or how am I willing to define success? What are my other options? Things like that. What if that is in itself a form of acceptance instead of just what my idea was, which was like, I just got to be like okay with the things that I'm not okay with. So that's another like question I've been asking myself recently. I feel like that sort of becoming open to the questions has been really helpful to me because it's helped me to see alternatives that I didn't see before. And that has helped me to change the story that I have, that things have to be a certain way.
Right. So, when you were growing up on the small island, you had certain beliefs about yourself and what was possible for you, and traveling kind of started to open up eh, different ideas, meeting different people, starting to question things. It sounds like asking questions, you had some pivotal moments where you started to ask yourself some questions, right? And that really opened up a whole different way of looking at the world. So, I want you to, if you can, like, very clearly, like, what was something that you believed that maybe wasn't possible for you when you were growing up, that now, because you have lived your life and you've had these experiences and you've met different people and you've asked these questions, that you now believe is actually possible for you, that as a child, you never could have imagined that this would have been possible for you?
One example that comes to mind is about writing. So when I was growing up, and actually this is one of the reasons I started my podcast. Because when I was growing up, I read a lot of books at school. I feel authors from different places, and I used to read a fair amount of Caribbean authors. And one of the things I believed was out of reach for me was to write the type of books that I wanted to write.
Mhm.
Because I felt like in the Caribbean, this is what Caribbean literature is. You need to be writing about these things. Nothing else felt possible to me, right? To write about what I wanted to write, right? Whatever I wanted to write, that did not feel possible to me. It didn't feel possible that I could write a book and hold it in my hands and have people purchase it all over the world. Like, I don't even think I was dreaming about it because it didn't even feel like that door was not just open, but it was even there, right? That door wasn't even there to me. And I remember when I was a teenager thinking, "Oh, I really wanna write a book." Uh, but also thinking like, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen. Just try and go and get a degree and get a job and live your life." That was what was available to me, right? Go, you get a degree, you get a job, maybe you get married, you have those kids that you're not sure you want, but that's what you're supposed to do in life, and that's that. And you're not gonna write a book, and you're not gonna do those things.
Oh.
So that, I think, was one thing that didn't feel possible.
So, obviously, I mentioned in the introduction you have 2 books now, right? So, at what point did that shift for you that you would be able to write the stories that you wanted to write?
So 2 things shifted for me. One was quite a few years ago, I did this course, which was a health coaching. And I did it because I had this, um, health condition, and I still have.
Mhm,
And I wanted a more holistic way to manage it.
mhm,
So I'd been watching this lady on YouTube or whatever, and she talks about then a few people were talking about this course they did, and I was like, "I'm gonna see if I can sign up for this course."
mhm,
I signed up for the course, it was an online course, and as part of it, you could go to Columbus Circle. I remember going to Columbus Circle because this was like a pivotal moment. They had a conference. It was free for anybody who was doing the course. So I went to the conference. I got there a bit early. Was walking around and there were all these people standing there with all these books. Like, what's happening here? And they were like, "Oh, these are our books. You self-published." And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah, yeah, you wrote these books and you self-published." And I was like, "You can just write a book and publish it? Ho what?" Like, the thought had never crossed my mind. And the funny thing is people always say to me, like, "All the information is out there online." But, like, if you don't know something is possible or even real, why would you look for it?
Right.
Right? So I'd never done any research into it or anything because I'd never heard of it.
Right.
I was like, "Huh, I could publish my own book.
Right.
I think I'm gonna do that."
Right.
That was when I decided I was gonna do it. It was a big gap between that and actually doing it, and what happened during that gap is the one other thing that I found that has shifted my stories, which was doing something small,
Mm.
making tiny versions, doing these tiny experiments. And
Right.
so for me, that was my blog.
Right.
I set myself a challenge to do this blog series of like 39 lessons I learned before I turned 40. And after I'd written it, I was like, written like thousands of words. You could totally write a book. You can write it. You have enough ideas to write a book. That's fine. Because that's one of the other very specific stories I believe was that I didn't have enough ideas to fill a book.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
When I realized I'd written this whole blog series and I'd written all this stuff, I was like, "Man, you could write a book." And now I knew how to publish it. Now I felt like that was all the pieces coming together that then helped me to go on and do it.
I love that because as you were talking, I just got this image of you as a little girl. I've never seen a picture of you as a little girl, but I just got this image of you as a little girl kind of
Oh,
at that
so
conference, wide-eyed, like her whole world just opening up and expanding of like, wow, like you can self-publish? You mean I could actually write the stories that I want to write in the way that I want to write them? I love thinking of younger you celebrating a little bit upon that recognition. And also, I'm a big fan of small shifts. That's what I
Mm.
tell a lot of my clients to start with are small shifts in their life to build their belief in themselves. So, how do you feel like you've seen small shifts? I know you said about the blogging. Are there any other sometimes I think once we have a methodology or something that it's like, "Oh, I did this in blogging. Now how do I do this in this area? Now how do I do this in this area? How do I apply this to different areas?"
Yeah. So part of the reason I find the tiny thing or the small experiment or the small shift, part of the reason I feel like it worked, particularly with the book,
Mhm.
is because I finished it.
Mm,
And I always tell people I feel like actually finishing something I started, I feel like that is something that totally transformed my life. I think probably in one of our previous or upcoming, because I'm not sure what order things are going on in episodes, we talk about self-trust,
right.
right? And I think finishing something, a project like my book, and that's how you and I met actually, because we were
Right.
doing publishing and marketing our books at the same time. So that's actually how we met. But I think getting to the end of that process and finishing it, I feel like it unlocked something in my brain of like, I know how to finish stuff.
Mm,
And I don't think I'd doubted that before in a way like I have a degree, like I've done things, right? I've planned trips and I've done things, I've reached goals that I set myself.
right.
But I felt like I felt almost like a new person. Like, oh my goodness. If you make this thing small enough and you finish it, then I feel like you're sort of like my belief in what I was capable of, like, got bigger. So then I was like, "Ooh, if I can finish that, like, I can finish something else." And then I was able to, I started my podcast. That was something else that started as a small, tiny project that I I wanted to do one season of. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, you shouldn't do a seasonal podcast because the algorithm, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, that's cute, but that's what I'm gonna do, and that's fine. And now it's been like 4 years I've been podcasting, right? So, like,
Oh.
even that started as a tiny project.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like there have been other things, other creative things that I've done. I wrote a novel, which was like another dream thing I wanted to do, which is Lessons in Love. And then there's just been other things I feel like I've achieved through small steps
Mhm.
that I didn't I don't think I even would have, not even that I don't not think those things were possible, but I don't think I would have even attempted them. Like, I took this job in a city that I'd never been to, and I think there have been lots of little things I've done during this time that I've just been like, "I'm just gonna try this small thing and see how it goes." I wrote this academic article, and now it's a chapter in a book, and I'm like, "What? What? Like, I can write an academic article? Didn't know I could do that." So just things like that, and they may all seem writing related because some of them are,
Right.
but yeah, I don't know. I feel like I really believe in small projects that you can finish because I feel like something about that builds your self-trust. It certainly did for me.
Right.
Built my own trust in myself to finish something, to create the thing that I wanted to create, to do the thing that I said I was gonna do, to achieve something that I was like, I'm not even sure how I'm gonna do this.
Right.
And then has given me the confidence to do other things.
Right. Right. Well, as you know, I'm a huge fan of the small steps, but I love hearing about all of these things that you've applied that idea to, the power of small steps. And I can hear in your voice and I can see that, that has built up your self trust and that has really shifted your story about what's possible for you. It feels now like maybe if there's something that comes into your mind that you want to do and our minds will probably almost immediately start to doubt that we can do something because it just wants to keep us safe and it wants to keep us where we are in comfort and familiarity. But it sounds like you have this powerful tool now, like the question piece of things, asking the question differently about the thing. And then once you
Mhm.
maybe ask different questions about it, then you can shift it into what's a small step that I could take toward that thing. Does that feel right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 100%. It's so fun. She created a whole framework around it because for me, it's felt like asking myself different questions and even finding the ability to question myself,
Right.
being curious, staying curious instead of getting fixated. I'm like,
Right.
huh, hmm. Then it has kind of allowed me to then even be able to think up what that tiny experiment or that tiny project could be, find a way to complete it, and then that has that feedback of like, "Oh, I'm capable of doing something I didn't know I could do. This is amazing. What else am I capable of? How can I expand this thing?"
So I love this. It's asking questions, getting curious, then asking yourself, like, what's a small thing that I could do? Taking that small step, which then allows you to be more bold in taking subsequent steps, right? I
Yeah.
feel like even when we start to shift our stories, we can get triggered, potentially find ourselves backsliding into old stories. So I want to know from you personally, you know, how or when do you most often find yourself slipping back into some of those old stories, and what do you do to get yourself back on track?
Mm. So, I find myself slipping back into those stories all the time. Or more accurately, I sometimes find different versions of those stories. So maybe they may have we talk about, when we talk on the podcast, we talk about a root thing that may then have lots of different ways of expressing yourself.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to think of an example. So this happened, I know I'm hesitating to use another writing example, but these are the kind of things that happen to me. So this happened a few nights ago. So seems like a perfect example. I went out for dinner for one of my work colleagues who was retiring, and she was talking about now that she's retiring, how she's going to spend her time, and she wants to spend more time writing. And she loves to write, but like she writes a lot of academic articles. And that's always, even though I just said like I've written one and I was like, oh, I could write one, but it's always felt really hard to me. Writing academic articles always felt really hard, and I know I have a lot of stories around academia and all that, even though that's where I work and that's my job now, I see versions of the stories popping up,
Right.
and so that was one of them, right? Like, I said to her, I was like, "I find it really hard," but it had never she was like, "Do you?" And so she described how she felt when she was doing it, and I was like, that's exactly how I feel when I'm writing." So I was like, "Ah." So then I started thinking, what if what if I'm finding something difficult to write about because of how I'm thinking about it?
Mm,
It never occurred to me before.
right.
You know, like, it's so and it like, well, I'm like, "Duh, obviously, that's exactly what it is." But it hadn't occurred to me. So I was like, if I can find a different way to think about this academic writing, maybe I'll find it easier because maybe it is just writing. I hadn't really considered that before.
Mm.
So I feel like that's a different version of the fears that used to come up when I didn't think I could write the books that I wanted or that type of thing. I now feel quite comfortable that I could write the book that I wanted, but I don't feel like I can write the academic article. Do you see what I mean? So it's like there's just different versions of my stories that will come to the surface when I'm getting involved in doing different things or having different conversations with different people and suddenly realizing, oh, where did that come from? I didn't realize that was there. Oh,
Right.
but now I can see it enough to think about it and to turn it around and see how I can rephrase it. I'm reframing for myself.
Right. I love that. That's so powerful. It takes a tremendous amount of awareness on your part, which I think is huge because not everyone has that, but it's something that I just want to highlight. I think that from what you're sharing, like that can become a practice. Like that,
Yes.
it can become something that you train yourself to recognize the stories that you're telling yourself about something and then reframe them. Right. And that's really where your power lies is to recognize the stories. Are these true? Are these things that I even like? Do I want to believe them? If
Mhm.
not, what other questions can I ask myself around them? Right. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's really powerful.
Yeah. That's I would definitely agree with that because like the more I do it, the better I get at it.
Right.
Right? Like I said, I used to be very into the answers. I had this whole section on my blog that I started called More Questions and Answers, and it was hidden for almost the entire time I'd written it because I was like, "I'm blogging, I should have all the answers." Like, I wrote blogs for years thinking, like, I can only write a blog post when I feel like I have the answer about the thing I'm writing,
Right.
right? And
Right.
it's like recently that I was like, you can have questions, that's okay. Like, not just have questions because I always have questions, but, like, you can have questions out loud in your blog that you didn't answer. Because I used to be very answer driven, but the more I kind of allowed myself to see, like, questions are so much more expansive than answers. I
Yes.
feel like I started to be able to see those questions more.
Yes. Yes. You spurred something in me when you said that questions are so much more expansive than answers. What it brought up for me is my journey with Christianity and my journey with faith and spirituality. And I used to feel like I needed to have the answers. If I didn't have the answers, then what did that mean about me as a Christian? And a huge shift in my story was I love I love not knowing the answers to questions, especially about God, faith, religion, and spirituality, because that means that every day I get to wake up and God gets to surprise me with something that I don't know the answer to about who God is or about spirituality or whatever, right? I get to be surprised. I get to learn more about my relationship with God because I don't think I have all of the answers because I know that I don't. And I'm willing
Yeah.
to say that I don't. I'm
No,
smiling, you're smiling because we both
I
know that we could talk
well,
for
I mean,
half
this
hour.
is a whole separate episode, and you talked about pivotal childhood moments. This is one that I think the older I get, the more important this moment has felt to me. So when I was about 6, and I know this because my sister still has this Bible. So when I was about 6, my dad gave me this big fat King James Version Bible. As I told you, I grew up in church.
Okay.
And Barbados is a very Christian country. So, it was at school, it was in church, it was very pervasive. And we had these like picture Bibles or the sort of versions that were like a picture book and it was storytelling or whatever. And I was like, this is not gonna work for me. I was 6, okay? I'm
Right.
like, yeah, this is not working for me. I need like this isn't I got too many questions. This ain't answering none of my questions. Like, this is not gonna work for me. And
Right.
so my dad gave me this big fat King James Version Bible that like everybody was like, "Why are you giving that to her? She's not gonna understand it." And he's like, "She gonna understand it though, because," and he actually engraved in the wrote in the front of it that he was giving it to me because he knew that I wanted to look the answers up for myself, right?
Mhm.
And my sister still has it to this day. That was always who I was. I always had questions. I think the big shift for me was in letting the questions be more important than the answers.
100%.
So I smiled because when you said that about your journey, I was like, yeah, my journey began there too. It just went off in a different direction.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I love that. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that this is one of the reasons why I love doing the podcast with you. I love that we, after 7 years and only being internet friends, continue to have relationship because you are an expander for me in that even if we don't see eye to eye on something, and I say
mhm,
that kind of lightly and loosely because it's not like we've ever like, come to blows about anything. There have been times when we have had conversations about things and maybe we're coming from a different place, but because you have, and I think I have, we both have such an expansive view on like, it's okay to let there be questions. It's okay, that you might ask me something and I might not have the answer or an answer that you agree with or like, and like you're okay with that. And I'm also okay with that. I just think that if there was more of that in the world where we didn't feel like we so desperately needed to cling to certainties about things and have all of the answers, I think that there could be things would be look a lot different in this world. So,
and I think I'll hark back to probably one of the very first things I said, which was also accepting that multiple things could be true at once,
yes.
right? And I think that's been a big journey for me because one of the things that I found, and I will say this, in full transparency, I don't go to church anymore. I still have questions that are for another conversation about the whole faith thing. But growing up in the church and growing in that faith, I felt like I was looking for having a question meant having the answer,
Mm,
which meant only one thing is possible,
right,
right? Or only one thing is true. And so to see multiple things can be true at once, like I used to feel like I needed to know, okay, this is how exactly how to answer it. Whereas now I'm feeling 12 different things.
right, right.
So I
Yeah,
don't know what to tell you. That's where I am right now. I'm just letting the fact that there's more than one truth there.
right.
Be be okay with that, and I think a part of that is letting go of one thing having to be the answer or the right thing or the right way.
Right. Yes. Yeah, it's so much more comfortable for our minds to it's actually uncomfortable for me, but I find for a lot of people, it's much more comfortable to cling to black and white, right or wrong, only one way of thinking. I honestly cannot even do that. As soon as I start to go towards seeing something one way, it's like this little door opens in the other side of my mind and immediately shows me the other side of things, which is, I think, what makes me a really good therapist. But yeah, I love what you're saying. I love what you've shared. And I just want to ask, is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with before we go?
I do.
Okay.
There's no such thing as a proper adult.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. There's not.
Is it? I this was one of the big shifts that I had. I think I must have been in my 30s at that point. I didn't even realize it was a story that I held, right? But I was
Mm,
chatting with someone about something, and then I said, I was like, "That's not how a proper adult does it." And she's like, "What did you just say?" And I was like, "What did I just say?" Like, what's this proper? And I realized that I was holding on to a lot of ideals around, you know, when I said to you I was a teenager and I thought there were these things I didn't know. And I
mhm,
feel like that was the grown up version of that idea. That
mm,
like there's a way to be in the world as a proper adult. And maybe it's about how clean your apartment is, or maybe it's about whether you buy the frozen chopped onions. Big
right,
conversation over here, or about baking something from scratch or making something from scratch or like whatever crazy ideas. And I realized they were all wrapped up in these invisible ideas I don't know where they came from. I couldn't even tell you I had them. I couldn't put my finger on any of them. And also realizing that like, if I met a proper adult, not sure I'd like them, but just thinking like the version of that thing that I was thinking in my mind, that if I met them, I'd be like, "Ugh, I don't wanna be friends with you. You're the worst." So, letting that so I would say to anybody who feels like there's this invisible standard that they're trying to reach and they can't, they don't know where it came from, whatever, not there.
right, right,
No such thing as a proper adult. So
right.
please, please, please revisit that belief or whatever beliefs are associated with that.
Right. Well, and I love that because that leads you to ask even more questions about your life because I find that so many people beat themselves up because they feel like they need to be somewhere that they're not or doing something that they're not because of this notion of being a proper adult. You touched on some of those things, having
Mm,
kids, getting married, buying the house, you know, the white
yeah.
picket fence, all the things, right? And it's like, what if there's no such thing? What if it's all made up? I
What
think
if it's
it is.
something and, if you ask any of my work colleagues, the things that I probably do the most are sing out loud in the corridor and say, "But it's all made up," in a really loud voice.
There we
Uh,
go.
they
Uh,
they seem to be okay with it, so
yeah, I love that. I love that. So, Sophia, a huge thank you for being here and sharing so vulnerably with us today.
Mhm.
Conversations like this, I think they help remind us that the stories that we grew up with and the things that we have believed, they don't have to define who we become. So,
Mm.
my hope is that as you listeners go about your week, you'll notice where old beliefs might be showing up for you and maybe even start asking yourself some new, more expansive questions. And if you want to connect with Sophia further, learn all about her books, her blog, her podcast, please check the show notes on whatever platform you're listening to this on. I will link all of her information there. And we're sending you so much love and gratitude. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message on social media. I'm at the Allie Rose on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to be coached on a future episode or explore what it would look like to work with me one on one, head over to shiftyourstorypodcast.com. And if you never want to miss an episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps more people find this work. Until next time, keep shifting, keep growing, and most importantly, I want you to remember that your story isn't set in stone. You always have the power to shift it.